When her son-in-law scoffed that old people don't deserve love, Margaret's smile froze mid-pour of tea. The words echoed through her chest, cracking something she thought had already died. Margaret Bennet's mornings always began the same way. Soft sunlight spilling across faded lace curtains, the faint tick of the kitchen clock, and the scent of chamomile tea steeping in her favorite chipped cup. She liked the quiet before her daughter's house came alive, before traffic hummed and phones buzzed. She would hum old melodies while tending to her roses, each bloom a reminder of her late husband, Thomas. She still spoke to him sometimes, not out loud but in the hush between birdsongs. "You'd laugh at me for keeping this garden alive, wouldn't you, Tom?" The truth was, she missed laughter more than anything. Her daughter Emily, now 34, lived across town with her husband Daniel and their 8-year-old daughter Lily. Margaret visited often, baking muffins or helping with school runs. She never wanted to be a burden, so she always came with her hands full. Gifts, food, or smiles. But lately, she'd begun to feel like an extra chair at the table. Useful but unnecessary. Daniel Grant's mornings were chaos. Phone glued to his ear, tie half done, caffeine in one hand and impatience in the other. He was the kind of man who moved through life like a deadline. Efficient, sharp, and always a little too loud. His employees admired him. His clients respected him. But at home, his warmth flickered like a faulty light. He loved Emily, but even love had become another thing to manage. He adored his daughter, though his hugs often came as quick pats between meetings. And Margaret, well, she was fine. She meant well, but to him she represented everything he was afraid of. Slowing down, losing control, growing old. That Friday evening, the family gathered at Daniel and Emily's house for dinner. The table was dressed beautifully. Margaret had brought her apple pie, the one recipe that even Daniel never complained about. The conversation was light at first. Lily talking about her school art project, Daniel sharing stories from work. Then Emily, unaware of the emotional landmine she was stepping on, smiled at her mother and said, "Mom, I saw Mr. Thompson from the garden club today. He asked about you." Margaret's cheeks pinked slightly. "Oh, Harold. He's such a kind man. He asked if I'd like to have dinner sometime." Emily's eyes sparkled. "That's lovely, Mom." But Daniel's fork clinked loudly against his plate. "Dinner? With Harold Thompson?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "What's he, 70? You two gonna hit the bingo hall after dessert?" The laughter didn't reach Margaret's eyes. Emily frowned. "Daniel." He waved a dismissive hand. "I'm just saying it's cute. But come on, dating. At your age." The air shifted. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly felt deafening. Margaret smiled politely, trying to laugh it off, but her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. "I suppose you're never too old for company," she said softly. "Company, sure," Daniel replied, smirking. "But love. Let's be real, old people don't need that anymore. They've had their time." The words landed like stones. Emily's eyes widened. Lily glanced around, confused by the sudden silence. Margaret didn't respond. She just nodded, her smile faltering, and stared down at her tea. Inside she felt something crack open. Not anger but deep, aching humiliation. Later that night, back in her small home, Margaret sat by the window, the sound of rain tapping gently on the glass. Her phone buzzed. "Harold Thompson. Still up for dinner tomorrow? There's a lovely little place by the lake." Her thumb hovered over the screen. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to feel seen. But Daniel's voice echoed in her mind. Old people don't need that anymore. She turned the phone face down and stared into the darkness. Meanwhile, Daniel brushed his teeth, feeling oddly satisfied after dinner, unaware of the wound he'd left behind. He told himself he was being practical, even protective. Love is for the young, he thought. It's about building futures, not clinging to what's gone. But when he caught his reflection in the mirror, something about the fine lines around his eyes made him pause. He didn't like it, so he looked away. The next morning, Margaret received a call from Emily. "Mom, about last night. Daniel was out of line." I'm sorry. Oh, don't you worry, sweetheart, Margaret said, forcing lightness into her tone. He's right in a way. I suppose that kind of thing isn't for me anymore. Emily's voice softened. You don't believe that, do you? Margaret smiled faintly at the window. It's all right. I've had my share. But her eyes glistened. That evening, Margaret sat on her porch, watching the sunset dissolve into soft purples and golds. Harold passed by, watering his roses across the street. He waved gently. She waved back, then quickly turned away before he could cross over. Inside, she whispered to the empty room. I'm not old. I'm just forgotten. The wind rustled through her garden, carrying her words away. Do you believe love has an age limit? Or do you think the heart never truly grows old? Tell me what you think in the comments. The next few days passed like slow rain, soft, steady, and heavy with silence. Margaret pretended life went on as usual, but something inside her had wilted. Her garden, once her refuge, now felt lifeless. The roses drooped as though mirroring her mood. She found herself staring at them for long stretches, forgetting what she'd meant to do. Her phone buzzed again. Harold Thompson. Still would love to see you, Margaret. Just coffee, maybe. Her fingers hovered over the reply box, but her stomach clenched. She set the phone down without typing a word. That afternoon, Emily called again. Mom, Lily has her school play next week. Can you come help me with her costume? Margaret smiled faintly. Of course, dear. You know I love being there for my Lily. Mom. And maybe after, you and I can go out for dinner? Just us. That sounds nice, Margaret said softly, though her heart was elsewhere. She missed her husband, the quiet evenings when he would hum old jazz tunes while fixing the radio. She'd loved him deeply, but life had taken him too soon. And she'd learned to live with that absence, until Harold had reminded her what possibility felt like. Now, even that flicker of hope felt foolish. Daniel sat in his sleek office, scrolling through reports. A coworker joked about retirement plans, and Daniel rolled his eyes. Retirement. That's when you stop living, he said, half laughing. I plan to go out working, not sitting around feeding pigeons. The others laughed. All except one in turn, a quiet young woman named Sarah, who said gently, My grandpa still volunteers at the animal shelter. Says it gives him purpose. Daniel smirked. Sure, but that's just keeping busy. Let's be honest. The world moves on without you once you're old. The room went silent. Even he felt the sting of his own words. But instead of reflecting, he deflected, changed the topic, turned his attention back to numbers, deals, distractions. That evening, Emily sat in the living room, folding laundry when she heard her mother's name mentioned from the study. Daniel was on the phone with a friend from his gym. She's dating. No, not really, Daniel said, laughing. It's not serious. She's what, mid-60s? Come on, man. That ship sailed. Old people don't need love. They need grandkids and hobbies. Emily froze, the towel slipping from her hand. Yeah, Daniel continued, chuckling. I told Emily she should stop encouraging it. It's weird. Love at that age. It's like watching your parents go clubbing. Emily's chest tightened. Her mother had been humiliated once already. And here he was, still mocking her. She stepped into the doorway. Daniel, she said sharply. He turned, startled. It's just a joke. It's not funny, she snapped. Do you even realize what those words do to her? Daniel frowned. I'm protecting her. It's embarrassing, Emily. People talk. She's supposed to be an example for Lily. Emily's voice trembled. An example of what? Misery. Self-denial. You think love expires at 65. He rolled his eyes. It's not that. It's awkward. Awkward for who? You. Their voices rose. Lily peeked down the stairs, worried. Emily lowered her tone but not her anger. You humiliated her, Daniel. You took something beautiful, something that made her feel alive again, and made it shameful. Daniel's jaw tightened. I'm not apologizing for telling the truth. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Then you're blinder than I thought. She walked away, leaving him standing there, defensive and hollow. Later that night, Emily called her mother. Mom, I need to tell you something. Daniel. Margaret cut in gently. I know, sweetheart. What? I overheard him tonight, Margaret said quietly. You put the phone on the counter earlier while you were cooking. I heard every word. Emily gasped. Oh, Mom. I'm so sorry. Don't, Margaret whispered. He's right. Maybe I was being silly. Old hearts don't beat like they used to. Emily's voice broke. That's not true. You deserve love, Mom. Real love. Margaret smiled sadly. Maybe. But it's easier to just be grateful for what I have. She hung up before Emily could argue further. Days turned to weeks. Margaret stops wearing her favorite floral dresses. Stops humming in the mornings. She deletes Harold's messages without reading them. Harold, puzzled, leaves a note in her mailbox. If I've done something wrong, I'm sorry. But I meant what I said. You still make the world brighter. She holds the note to her chest, her eyes filling, then folds it neatly into her journal, between pages she'll never reread. One evening, as the sun melted into gold, Lily came over to her grandmother's for a school project. Grandma, she asked suddenly, did you ever fall in love? Margaret smiled faintly. Oh yes, my darling. Once, a very long time ago. Was it like in the movies? Margaret chuckled. Better, I think. It was quiet and gentle, like the way the rain touches flowers. Lily tilted her head. Then why don't you do it again? The question caught Margaret off guard. She looked at her granddaughter, so innocent, so full of belief. She opened her mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. That night, Margaret sat by her window again, Harold's note in hand. The moonlight pooled around her like a soft blanket. Maybe love wasn't meant for her anymore. But the ache she felt, that hollow space where something should be, didn't feel old. Felt alive. And alive, she realized, was something she hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel couldn't sleep. Emily had barely spoken to him for days. His daughter had started asking questions about why Grandma looks sad. He told himself he'd done nothing wrong, that he was just being honest. But each time he replayed his own words, they sounded colder, crueler. Old people don't deserve love. It echoed now, not as confidence but as shame. He turned out the light, but sleep didn't come. The morning sun spilled weakly through the clouds, pale and uncertain, much like the way Margaret felt inside. Her home smelled faintly of cinnamon, but the warmth was gone. The house felt larger now, emptier, every clock tick echoing like a reminder of time she couldn't reclaim. She tried to busy herself, dusting the same shelf twice, refolding already neat linens, wiping spotless counters. But no matter what she did, Daniel's voice still echoed in her mind. Old people don't need love. They've had their time. She hated that she remembered it word for word. Emily hadn't spoken more than a few words to Daniel since that night. Their once warm kitchen now hummed with quiet tension, spoons clinking against mugs, the occasional sigh. Daniel noticed the silence but didn't know how to break it. Finally he muttered, "You're still upset about your mom, aren't you?" Emily looked up sharply. "You think it just goes away?" He rubbed his temples. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I was being realistic." "Realistic," Emily repeated. "You told a woman who's given everything, her youth, her heart, her years, that she doesn't deserve love. That's not realism, Daniel. That's cruelty." He stiffened. "You're twisting it." "I meant." She cut in, her voice trembling with frustration. "You meant what you said. You just don't want to admit how small it sounded." Daniel clenched his jaw, staring at his coffee. "You don't understand. My father." He stopped himself. Emily waited, but he didn't finish. Instead, he stood and grabbed his briefcase. "I'm late for work." The front door closed softly, leaving only the sound of Lily humming upstairs, a song about love and bravery that felt painfully ironic. Margaret sat at her writing desk, journal open, pen hovering. She began writing. Dear Thomas, it's been 31 years since you left. I never thought I'd feel something again, but someone smiled at me last month, and it warmed the parts of me I thought were gone. Then I was told it's foolish, that it's wrong to want love when you're old. Maybe it is. But why does it hurt so much to let it go? Her pen paused as a tear dotted the paper. She sighed, closed the journal, and tucked it beneath her pillow, as if hiding the words could make the ache disappear. That afternoon she went grocery shopping. Harold was at the market too, picking ripe tomatoes. When he spotted her, his face lit up like a sunrise. Margaret, been missing your face around the garden club, he said warmly. She smiled politely. Oh, I've been busy with family. Ah, family keeps us on our toes. He chuckled. Still, you used to bring your famous lemon cookies. Without them, meetings aren't quite the same. She nodded, her heart twisting. Maybe next time. Harold tilted his head. You sure you're all right? You seem distant. I'm fine, she lied, rearranging a basket of apples that didn't need rearranging. Just fine. He studied her for a moment, then simply said, All right. But if you ever need company, even just for tea, I'm right across the street. She smiled, but the light didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, Daniel came home late. Emily sat on the couch, scrolling absently through her phone. He hesitated at the doorway. You still angry? I'm not angry, she said flatly. I'm disappointed. He sat across from her. Look I just think your mom is setting herself up for heartbreak. What if this guy leaves her? What if people start talking? She's fragile. Emily shook her head. No, you're the fragile one, Daniel. You're the one afraid of people talking. He flinched. That's not fair. She softened slightly. Then tell me the truth. Why does her happiness bother you so much? Daniel opened his mouth, but the words tangled in his throat. Because, he exhaled. Because I watched my father fall apart when my mother died. He lost himself chasing memories, said he couldn't live without her. He died 2 years later, alone, trying to find what was already gone. I swore I'd never end up like that. Emily's voice gentled. And you think love is what killed him? I think hope did, he whispered. Silence hung heavy between them, the kind that carries both pity and pain. Emily reached for his hand, but he pulled away, too proud to crumble yet. The rain started again. Margaret sat by the window, staring at the streetlights flickering through the drizzle. She thought of Harold, of his laugh, his kindness, the way he looked at her like she wasn't invisible. Then she thought of Daniel's words again, sharp as glass. Old people don't need love. She whispered to the dark. Then why do I still ache for it? Her cat jumped into her lap, purring softly. Margaret smiled through tears. Maybe you're right, Daisy. Maybe some aches are proof that we're still alive. The next day, Emily convinced her mother to join a family brunch. The atmosphere was strained but polite. Lily showed her school drawings, one of Grandma holding hands with a man in a garden. Margaret's cheeks flushed. Is that Harold? Emily asked, smiling. Before Margaret could answer, Daniel muttered under his breath. Cute. She's already sketching fairy tales. Margaret froze. Emily shot him a warning look. Lily blinked. Why? Grandma said love is nice. Daniel forced a tight smile. It is, sweetheart. For young people. Margaret's breath caught. The room went cold again. This time she didn't cry. She simply stood and said softly, Thank you for breakfast, dear. I should get home before the rain. Emily followed her to the door, tears glistening. Mom. Margaret squeezed her hand. It's all right, Emily. Don't make it harder for him. He doesn't understand yet. And with that quiet grace only years could teach, she stepped out into the drizzle, umbrella closed, letting the rain wash over her face. Inside, Daniel watched her from the window, something uneasy stirring in his chest. For the first time he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd mistaken cruelty for honesty. When someone hurts you out of pride or fear, do you believe patience can change their heart? Or is walking away the only path to peace? The storm came without warning, one of those late autumn tempests that turns the sky the color of iron. Wind tore branches from the maples, and rain hammered rooftops until gutters overflowed. By midnight, Margaret's old cottage surrendered. A crash split the night. A portion of her porch roof gave way, water pouring straight through her bedroom ceiling. The next morning, Emily arrived to find her mother standing in rubber boots, holding a bucket like a soldier in defeat. "Mom, you can't stay here," Emily said, wading through puddles on the floor. "It's just a leak," Margaret protested weakly. "It's a flood." Daniel appeared behind Emily, umbrella in hand, face unreadable. "Pack a bag," he said simply. "You're staying with us until this gets fixed." Margaret hesitated. "I don't want to intrude." Daniel sighed. "Your family, Margaret. Come on." The words sounded polite but not warm. Still, they were enough. By evening she was in their guest room, Emily's old sewing space converted hastily into a bedroom. The house smelled of cedar and coffee. Daniel's world neat and controlled. Dinner was quiet. Lily chatted about school while Daniel scrolled through emails, and Emily tried to keep conversation afloat. Margaret noticed Daniel's subtle discomfort, the way he avoided her eyes, the way his jaw tightened whenever she thanked him. After dinner she washed dishes despite Emily's protests. Daniel passed behind her to grab a glass. His sleeve brushed hers. He muttered, "Sorry," then added, "Didn't mean to startle you." She smiled softly. No harm done. For a moment their reflections met in the kitchen window, two people carrying different kinds of loneliness. The storm lingered for days, trapping them together. Daniel worked from home, pacing between conference calls. Margaret baked muffins to pass time, the scent of cinnamon drifting through the halls. During one call his headset died. Frustrated, Daniel swore under his breath. Margaret appeared quietly in the doorway. "You sound like my Thomas when he tried to fix the radio," she said with a small grin. Daniel frowned then, almost involuntarily, smiled back. Did he win? Oh, never. But he'd keep trying until the thing sparked. Daniel chuckled. "Sounds stubborn." "He called it persistence," she said. The laughter faded, replaced by a small, strange comfort neither expected. That night, Emily found them sitting in the living room. Margaret was mending Lily's torn school costume. Daniel sat nearby, watching the news. When a segment came on about a retirement couple getting married at 78, Daniel muttered, "Can't believe people still do that." Margaret looked up, needle pausing mid-air. "Why not?" He shrugged. "I just think it's late in the game to start over." She tied off the thread, eyes calm. "Love isn't a game, Daniel. There's no clock." Emily, listening from the doorway, caught the tremor in her husband's face, defense mixing with doubt. He didn't reply. The rain eased, but the contractors said repairs would take a week. Margaret insisted she could check into a motel. Daniel surprised everyone by saying, "No, you'll stay here. It's fine." That evening, Emily took Lily to a sleepover, leaving Margaret and Daniel alone. The house felt too quiet. Margaret brewed tea for two out of habit. Daniel walked in, saw the extra cup, and hesitated before sitting. "Thanks," he murmured. They drank in silence. After a while, Margaret spoke softly. "You know, Daniel, I wasn't angry about what you said." He looked up sharply. "You should have been." "I was hurt. But anger fades. Words, though, words stay." He shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean them like that." She smiled faintly. "How did you mean them?" He stared into his cup. "I don't know. Maybe I was scared." "Of what?" "Of watching someone hope again. I stopped believing in that a long time ago." Margaret studied him, this proud man suddenly sounding like a boy who'd lost something. "You know," she said gently, "hope doesn't ask for permission. It just finds a crack and grows through it." He blinked, speechless. For the first time since the dinner table incident, Daniel didn't look like an antagonist. He looked human. A burst pipe in the guest bathroom had them mopping side by side. Daniel grumbled, Margaret laughed, and somehow it didn't feel forced. "You missed a spot," she teased. "Hard to see through all your soap bubbles," he replied. When they finally sat down, breathless and damp, Margaret said, "You remind me of Thomas sometimes." He raised a brow. "Was he this charming?" She chuckled. "No. But he thought he was." They both laughed, a sound Emily heard as she came home, pausing at the door, smiling faintly at the sight. That night, as Margaret read in bed, she overheard Daniel on the phone. "Yeah, the house repairs will take a few more days." "No, it's fine. She's easy to be around." "Was." "Yeah, I know what I said before. Guess I didn't know her then." Margaret closed her book, heart quietly fluttering. Outside, the storm finally stopped. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the soaked garden. A single rose, beaten by the rain, stood upright again. Margaret touched the window pane and smiled. Have you ever been forced into closeness with someone you misjudged, only to realize they weren't who you thought? Tell me your story in the comments. The next few days carried an uneasy calm. The rain had gone, the air smelled of wet earth and renewal, and Margaret's laughter sometimes drifted down the hall when Lily returned from school. But Daniel could feel something inside him stirring, a quiet guilt that refused to sleep. Every time he passed Margaret in the kitchen or caught her soft humming from the garden, something in his chest tightened. He had hurt her, yet she treated him with grace he didn't deserve. And that kindness was harder to bear than any argument. Margaret was in the guest room sorting through some of her water-damaged belongings Emily had brought from her cottage. The storm had soaked most of them, but she was trying to salvage what she could. Daniel appeared at the door, hesitant. "Need help?" he asked quietly. She smiled without looking up. "Only if you know how to dry memories without breaking them." He hesitated, then stepped inside. "I can try." They began working together, drying old photographs with towels, laying them across the bed. Daniel picked one up. It was a picture of a young Margaret with a man and a little girl. "Thomas?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes. That was the summer before his diagnosis." Daniel frowned. "Diagnosis? Pancreatic cancer," she said softly. "He was gone before Lily was born." Daniel swallowed. "I'm sorry." Margaret smiled faintly. "Don't be. He gave me 25 good years. That's more than most get." They worked in silence for a while. Then, as Daniel lifted another photo, a folded letter fell from between the pages. He reached for it, but froze when he saw the trembling in her hands. "May I?" he asked gently. She nodded. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. "If you ever forget how strong you are, remember how I looked at you this morning, like the sun was still worth rising for." Daniel read it twice. Then quietly he said, "He loved you deeply." Margaret smiled through misty eyes. "He did. And that's why I never thought I'd feel something again." Daniel's brow furrowed. "You mean Harold?" She nodded. "He makes me laugh. And that scares me. Because laughter means I've opened a door I swore to keep shut." Daniel's throat tightened. "And I slammed it in your face." She looked up, surprised by the honesty in his voice. He sat down on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples. "When my dad lost my mom, he stopped living. He just sat in her chair day after day, talking to an empty room. I thought love made him weak." Margaret shook her head. "No. Love made him human. Grief is love with nowhere to go." He looked at her, really looked. "I never thought of it that way." He's 10 years old, peering around the corner of a dim living room. His father sits motionless, staring at an empty armchair. "Dad?" Young Daniel whispers. No response. Just the sound of rain tapping the window. That silence followed Daniel for years, turning into armor, then arrogance. Back in the present, Daniel's eyes glistened. My father told me right before he died, "Don't chase ghosts, son." Thought he meant love. Now maybe he meant fear. Margaret placed her hand over his. Fear steals more from us than death ever could. He let out a shaky breath. I said something unforgivable to you. And yet here you are, forgiving yourself, she said softly. He blinked. Do you? She smiled. Forgiveness isn't something I do for others, Daniel. It's how I stay whole. Emily came home to find Daniel sitting alone at the kitchen table. Photo albums spread before him. She hesitated. I haven't seen you look at those since your dad's funeral. He smiled faintly. Margaret made me realize something. Emily raised a brow. That she's right about love not having an expiration date. He laughed quietly. That too. He gestured toward the pictures. I used to think letting someone in meant losing control. But maybe it's just letting go. Emily's eyes softened. You're learning. He took her hand. Because of you. And your mom. She smiled, pressing his fingers gently. You still have time to tell her that, you know. Margaret was on the porch watering Emily's potted ferns when Daniel stepped out, hands in pockets. He stood there a moment watching her. You were right about one thing, he said finally. Love doesn't have a clock. But sometimes it needs a second chance to start ticking. He turned surprised. That sounds like something a poet would say. He smiled sheepishly. Don't tell anyone. Then after a pause he added, I talked to Harold this morning. Margaret's heart skipped. You what? I saw him at the hardware store. He was buying paint. Said he was fixing up his place, hoping you'd come visit when it's done. Margaret's cheeks flushed. Did you say anything? He nodded. I told him you deserved someone who makes you laugh. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Thank you, she whispered. Daniel shrugged. It's about time someone said it out loud. That evening, as the sun set over the backyard, Margaret placed the dried photograph of Thomas on the windowsill, next to a freshly picked rose from Harold's garden. Two loves, side by side. One memory, one promise. Morning came with soft light and the hum of birds outside the window. The storm had finally passed for good. Margaret stood by the kitchen counter, her hands dusted in flour, humming an old tune as she rolled dough. The smell of rising bread filled the air. Daniel wandered in, still half asleep, hair mussed, tie hanging loose around his neck. Smells like a bakery in here, he said, rubbing his eyes. Margaret chuckled. You looked like you needed comfort food. He leaned against the counter, watching her knead the dough with slow, deliberate motions. You always cook when you're thinking, don't you? He paused, surprised. You noticed. He nodded. I notice more than people think. Something about the gentleness in his voice startled her. He wasn't the same man who'd once mocked her dreams. Later that day, while Emily took Lily to her ballet recital, Daniel offered to help Margaret with the garden. They worked side by side, she pulling weeds, him trimming the overgrown hedge. At one point he said quietly, Emily told me what happened to Harold. Margaret nodded without looking up. Yes. He called off our walks after his son asked him to move to Oregon. He didn't even say goodbye. Daniel frowned. That must have hurt. It did. But I don't blame him. Sometimes people think they're protecting us by leaving. He was silent for a moment. I did that once, he admitted. When my mother got sick, I stopped visiting the hospital. I couldn't stand seeing her fade. My father never forgave me for that. Margaret's hands stilled on the soil. You forgave yourself. He shook his head slowly. Not really. She reached over, placing her hand over his wrist. Then maybe it's time. Their eyes met, two souls weathered by regret and misunderstanding, and for a moment silence became the gentlest kind of prayer. They shared dinner together, just the two of them. Emily had texted that she'd be late, and Lily was staying overnight with a friend. Margaret served roast chicken and vegetables, the kind she used to make for family Sundays. Daniel poured wine, awkwardly but with good intentions. Midway through the meal, Margaret laughed softly at one of his self-deprecating jokes. "You're learning humility," she teased. "I've had a good teacher," he said, smiling. Her cheeks flushed slightly. "Age doesn't make one wise, Daniel. It just makes you more aware of how much you still don't know." "That's exactly what wisdom sounds like," he replied quietly. The conversation deepened. Talk of love, loss, and what it means to start again. "I think love is like music," Margaret said. "Some melodies fade, but the rhythm stays in your bones. You can always learn to dance again." Daniel stared at her for a moment. "I used to think love was supposed to make life easier." She smiled sadly. "No, dear. It's meant to make us feel alive. Even when it hurts." He exhaled, eyes soft. "You sound like my mother when she was happy." "Then she must have loved deeply," Margaret whispered. "She did," he said. "And I hated her for leaving." Margaret reached across the table, touching his hand lightly. "Sometimes we confuse absence with betrayal. But love doesn't end, it just changes form." Daniel looked down, fighting the lump in his throat. "I didn't deserve that kind of forgiveness." "Maybe not then," she said gently. "But you do now." They ended up on the porch together, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars emerge one by one. Margaret told him stories of her youth, of the time she and Thomas got lost in Venice and danced in the rain instead of finding their way back. Daniel laughed until tears rolled down his cheeks. "You," he said, chuckling. "Dancing in the rain." "Oh, I was wild once," she said, mock-offended. "Age doesn't erase that." "I'm starting to see that," he said softly. Margaret tilted her head. "You know, Daniel, people always think growing older means losing things. But I think it means collecting them. Memories, lessons, moments, even pain. It all adds weight to who we are." Daniel nodded slowly. "Maybe I've been too scared to carry mine." "You're learning," she said. "That's all that matters." A comfortable silence followed, broken only by the sound of crickets. Daniel finally murmured, "I'm sorry, Margaret, for everything I said. You didn't deserve that." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "I know, Daniel. But maybe I needed to hear it. It reminded me that love isn't something you ask permission for. It's something you defend." He swallowed hard. "You're stronger than I thought. And you're softer than you pretend." They both laughed quietly, the sound mingling with the night breeze. Before heading to bed, Daniel noticed the vase of wilted roses on the counter. Without a word, he replaced them with fresh ones from the garden. The next morning, Margaret saw them and smiled. A small act, but it meant everything. Have you ever forgiven someone who hurt you, only to discover they were hurting too? What changed when you saw their pain? The following week began peacefully enough. Margaret's house repairs were nearly finished, and she was preparing to move back home. The days had been strangely warm, filled with quiet laughter, shared meals, and gentle conversations. Daniel had even started bringing her tea in the mornings, strong and sweet, just the way she liked it. But peace, like glass, can shatter without warning. It began at Emily's dinner table. She'd organized a small celebration to thank Daniel for helping Margaret and to toast the end of the long, stormy weeks. Harold, the kindly widower from the garden club, was also invited, at Emily's suggestion. Margaret hesitated when she saw him at the door. "Harold," she said softly, half surprised, half nervous. He smiled warmly. "Emily thought it'd be nice for us to catch up. I hope that's all right." Margaret glanced at Daniel. His jaw had already tightened. "Of course," Margaret said politely, though her hands trembled as she ushered him in. The dinner began pleasantly enough. Harold told stories about his grandchildren. Lily made everyone laugh with her dramatic retelling of a fairy tale. But beneath the warmth, Daniel's mood darkened. He couldn't stop glancing at Harold, the easy way he spoke to Margaret, the small smiles they exchanged. Finally, Harold said with a gentle grin, "Margaret, we still owe ourselves that walk in the rose garden, don't we?" Margaret laughed softly. Yes, we do. Before she could say more, Daniel interrupted, voice cutting across the table like a blade. Shouldn't you two be taking it easy? It's not exactly prom season anymore. The table fell silent. Emily froze, Lily's smile faded, and Harold's expression darkened with restrained dignity. Margaret's fork clinked against her plate. Her lips parted but no sound came out. Daniel, Emily hissed. What is wrong with you? He looked around defensively. I was joking. Everyone's so sensitive. No, Margaret said softly, standing up. You weren't joking. Her voice was calm, but her hands were trembling. You were trying to humiliate me. Again. Daniel stood too, guilt flashing briefly before pride took over. I'm just saying maybe it's time to stop pretending this thing means something. Margaret looked at him for a long, heavy moment. You know, Daniel, I once felt sorry for you. I thought you spoke out of pain. But now I see it's fear. You're terrified that one day, no one will love you when you're no longer young and powerful. Daniel's face drained of color. You don't know me. She nodded sadly. I do. You remind me of who I used to be before I learned that love has nothing to do with age. Only with courage. The air in the room grew so still that even the candles flickered unevenly. I'm sorry, Emily, Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. But I can't stay here anymore. Harold stood immediately. I'll drive you home, Margaret. She nodded, eyes wet. Thank you. Daniel took a step forward. Margaret, wait. But she didn't. She gathered her shawl, dignity wrapped tightly around her like armor, and walked out into the night. Hours later, Daniel sat alone in the living room. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, all of it had been replaced by silence. Emily had taken Lily upstairs, furious and disappointed. He sat staring at the cold fireplace, hands clenched, chest heavy. He wanted to defend himself, but there was no one left to hear it. His phone buzzed. A text from Harold. She's safe. Please, Daniel, stop trying to win arguments. Start trying to keep people. Daniel dropped the phone, running both hands through his hair. The words cut deeper than he expected. He thought of the way Margaret had looked at him before leaving. Not angry, not bitter, just done. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the sting of shame so sharp it made him nauseous. Meanwhile, at her small cottage, Margaret sat by the repaired window, tears glistening on her cheeks. Harold had left her at the door with a quiet, "Don't let his words steal your peace." But peace was a fragile thing. She stared out at the garden where the rose bush, once broken by the storm, was blooming again. A single petal drifted down, landing softly on the wet earth. She whispered, "You almost had me believing I was undeserving again." Her voice cracked. But not this time. She reached for her journal and began to write. Dear Thomas, I used to think growing older meant growing invisible. But tonight I remembered who I am. And no one, not even family, gets to tell me I don't deserve to be loved. The ink blurred where her tears touched the page. Emily found Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, red-eyed and silent. Do you even realize what you've done? She asked softly. He nodded. I destroyed something beautiful. Again. She sighed, fighting her tears. She finally felt alive again, Daniel. You could have protected that. You chose to break it instead. Daniel's voice cracked. I don't know why I keep doing this. Because you think control is safer than kindness, she said. But you're wrong. Control isolates you. Kindness connects you. Then she added quietly, you still have a chance to make it right. But only if you humble yourself. Daniel swallowed hard. Do you think she'd ever forgive me? Emily met his gaze. If you show her your heart instead of your pride, maybe. That night, Daniel drove past Margaret's cottage. The lights were off except for one dim glow in the window, her writing lamp. He parked but didn't knock. He just sat there, watching the faint shadow of her as she wrote. He whispered into the silence. I'm sorry, Margaret. I just didn't know how to love without fear. The words disappeared into the wind, but something inside him shifted. For the first time he wanted to change. Not to be forgiven but to deserve forgiveness. The days that followed felt heavier than the storm itself. The rain had long stopped, but inside both homes, the air carried the weight of unspoken things. Guilt, longing, and something deeper neither dared to name. Margaret filled her mornings with simple tasks, pruning the roses, dusting shelves, baking bread she never ate. Every sound in her cottage echoed loneliness. Yet for all her newfound independence, her chest ached in ways she hadn't expected. It wasn't Daniel's cruelty that haunted her now. It was his silence. Daniel sat at his desk, staring at the glow of his computer screen. He hadn't been able to concentrate in days. His inbox overflowed, but all he could think about was Margaret's face that night. Calm, composed, yet deeply wounded. He thought of how she'd looked at Harold with warmth, and how he'd ruined it with bitterness he didn't even understand. When Emily called him from home, he almost didn't answer. "Daniel," she said quietly, "Mom's birthday is next week." He froze. "I forgot." "I know," she said softly. "You could fix that." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "She won't want to see me." Emily hesitated. "You're right. She probably doesn't. But maybe it's not about what she wants. Maybe it's about what you need to do." Harold visited occasionally, always respectful, always kind. He brought flowers, told her stories about his grandchildren, and tried to make her laugh. But even he could sense something still weighed on her heart. "Margaret," he said one afternoon, "you don't need to forgive that man to find peace." She smiled faintly. "I know. But I do need to understand him to let go." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "That's a rare kind of grace." She sighed. "Grace is all we have when love breaks." The morning was bright and golden. Emily arrived early with Lily, balloons, and a homemade cake. "Happy birthday, Grandma." Lily squealed, wrapping her in a hug. Margaret laughed, warmth flooding her chest. "Oh, sweetheart, you're my best gift." Daniel didn't come. At least not yet. The small party was lovely. Laughter, candles, and the kind of joy Margaret hadn't felt in months. Yet beneath it all, there was still one empty space at the table. When Emily noticed Margaret's eyes drift toward the door, she gently asked, "You wish he were here?" Margaret hesitated, then said softly, "I wish he were whole." Daniel sat in his car for nearly an hour outside Margaret's gate, bouquet in hand, rehearsing words he couldn't quite form. He'd written and torn up 3 apology letters that week. None of them sounded enough. Finally, he exhaled shakily and got out. When he reached the door, he saw laughter inside. Harold pouring tea, Lily twirling in her dress, Margaret smiling gently. He froze. For a second he thought about leaving. Maybe his absence was the better apology. But then Margaret looked up, straight at him through the window. Their eyes met. She didn't move. Neither did he. Then, with a deep breath, Daniel opened the door. The laughter faded instantly. Emily's hand stilled mid-cut of cake. Harold looked away politely. Daniel held out the bouquet. Roses, white and soft. "Happy birthday, Margaret." Margaret studied him quietly. "Why are you here, Daniel?" His voice wavered. "Because I can't carry what I said anymore." He took a step closer. "I thought I was protecting Emily and Lily. I thought love made people weak. Made them lose themselves. But I was wrong. I was the one who was afraid. Afraid that I'd grow old and no one would see me. That I'd become invisible." His throat tightened. "I saw you living without shame, without apology, and I resented it because I didn't know how." The room was silent except for the ticking clock. Margaret's eyes softened, but she didn't speak. Daniel continued, voice breaking. "You don't owe me forgiveness. But I needed to say this. You do deserve love. You've reminded me what it looks like." A tear slipped down his cheek. "I just hope one day someone says the same about me." Margaret's breath trembled. "Oh, Daniel." She walked to him slowly, her eyes wet but kind. You remind me of Thomas when he was learning to apologize. Clumsy but honest. Daniel laughed weakly. That's fair. She reached up, gently brushing a tear from his face. I forgive you. But don't let that be the end of it. Change should follow grace. He nodded, relief and grief blending in his voice. I will. The celebration resumed softly. Daniel stayed, quieter this time, helping Lily serve cake and listening to Harold's stories without interruption. At one point, Margaret looked around the table, at her daughter's laughter, at Harold's kind eyes, at Daniel's new humility, and felt something unspoken lift from her chest. When Daniel caught her looking, he offered a small, almost boyish smile. She returned it, warm and forgiving. As everyone left, Daniel lingered at the door. Margaret, he said, voice hushed. Thank you for letting me stay. She smiled. Thank you for showing up. He hesitated, then asked, does it ever get easier? Forgiving yourself. She thought for a long moment before answering. It doesn't get easier, Daniel. Just gets quieter. The guilt fades, but the lesson stays. He nodded. I think I'm ready to start listening to the quiet. Margaret's smile widened. Then you're already halfway there. Have you ever faced someone who hurt you? Not to get an apology, but to release the weight from your own heart. What did that moment teach you? Spring came early that year. The world outside seemed to exhale. Blossoms on the cherry trees, warm sunlight glinting on the windows, and laughter carrying through the open doors of Margaret's small cottage. It had been 3 months since her birthday. The garden, once ruined by storms, was now alive with color again. Yellow daffodils, white roses, and wild violets climbing the fence like hope reborn. Margaret was pruning the rose bushes when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Need a hand, gardener? She turned to see Daniel standing by the gate, holding a small wooden box and wearing that cautious, self-conscious smile she'd come to recognize. Well, look who finally learned to knock, she teased. He laughed. I thought I'd bring a peace offering. He handed her the box. Inside was a silver locket, engraved with 3 initials. Earl. Margaret Thomas Lane, he said. Your full name. Emily helped me find the engraver. I figured. Maybe it's time someone gave you something that said you're still whole. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the locket. It's beautiful, Daniel. He nodded. So are you. She smiled softly. Careful, someone might think you've changed. He chuckled. I hope so. Later that day, Emily and Lily joined them in the garden. Harold arrived with sandwiches and lemonade, and the 4 adults sat together under the old oak tree, watching Lily chase butterflies with her net. The laughter came easily now. No tension, no old wounds reopening. At one point, Daniel leaned toward Margaret and said quietly, I've been volunteering at the hospice center, talking to the elderly there. I realized how much loneliness people carry when no one believes they're still capable of love. Margaret looked at him, eyes glistening. That's a beautiful thing to do. He nodded. I guess I wanted to make amends, not just to you, but to the part of me that forgot how to care. She reached over, squeezed his hand gently. You didn't forget, Daniel. You just needed someone to remind you. As the sun dipped lower, Harold began strumming a guitar he'd brought along. Lily begged for a song, and soon the garden was filled with music. Soft, nostalgic, the kind that carries memory in every note. Daniel watched as Margaret and Harold exchanged a tender smile. He no longer felt threatened by it. In fact, he felt something close to pride. He leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the sound of laughter wash over him. For the first time in years, his heart felt light. After the others left, Daniel lingered to help clean up. The light had softened into dusk, and fireflies blinked gently across the yard. Margaret poured 2 cups of tea and handed him one. You've done well, Daniel, she said warmly. He shook his head. I've just started. Starting is everything, she replied. He sipped quietly before saying, You know, when I told you that old people didn't deserve love, what I really meant was, I didn't think anyone did. Not after loss. Not after failure. Margaret smiled sadly. And now I know love isn't something we earn. It's something we keep alive by showing up. She nodded slowly, her eyes glimmering with tears. That's all I ever wanted you to understand. They sat in silence, the sky above them deepening into indigo. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and rain. Then Daniel spoke again. Harold's good for you. Margaret smiled gently. He's kind. And he listens. Daniel chuckled softly. That's a rare skill. It is, she said. But you've learned it too. A few days later, Emily convinced Margaret to host a small gathering for the neighbors. A spring renewal tea party, she called it. Margaret hesitated at first, but Daniel offered to help with the decorations. When the day arrived, the backyard looked like a dream. Ribbons, wildflowers, and tea sets gleaming in the sun. Margaret moved gracefully among her guests, radiant in a soft lavender dress. At one point, a younger woman from the neighborhood approached her. Mrs. Lane, she said shyly, I saw you dancing with Mr. Harold earlier. You look so happy. It gives me hope that love doesn't end. Margaret smiled, eyes kind. My dear, love doesn't end. It changes shape, but it never stops breathing. Daniel overheard and felt something swell inside his chest. Admiration, affection, respect. When she turned and caught his gaze, she mouthed, Thank you. He smiled back, For what? And she whispered, For seeing me. As the evening ended, Daniel stood by the gate watching Margaret and Harold laugh together as they watered the roses. The last light of the day bathed them in gold. Emily came up beside him. You look peaceful, she said. I am, he admitted. For the first time, I don't need to be right. I just need to be kind. She smiled and slipped her arm through his. Mom would be proud. She already is, he said softly. Together they watched Margaret and Harold, two souls who had survived storms and still chosen love. Weeks later, Daniel wrote Margaret a letter. His handwriting uneven but heartfelt. Dear Margaret, you taught me something no book or sermon ever could, that love isn't measured by youth, but by courage. You showed me that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's strength disguised as grace. I hope to spend the rest of my life loving the way you do, without shame, without fear, and without time limits. Thank you for reminding me that we all deserve love, even when we think we don't. Yours with gratitude, Daniel. Margaret smiled when she read it, tears blurring the ink. She placed the letter inside her locket, beside a faded photo of Thomas and a small pressed rose petal from her garden. She whispered into the quiet, You'd have liked him, Thomas. And for the first time in a long time, her heart felt both full and free. The camera pans out. Margaret, Harold, Emily, Daniel, and Lily walking down the garden path together, laughter mingling with birdsong. The screen fades to light as Margaret's voice echoes softly. Love doesn't retire. It simply waits for the brave to find it again.
Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this video, and I'm confident you enjoyed it. We've got plenty more exciting and heartwarming stories waiting for you. Just click on the image on your screen to watch the next one.